Mindfulness. Interestingly, sometimes you can enhance your brain function simply by focusing on the right thing or changing the way you think. And when coupled with what we have learned about plasticity and about short-term memory, you might be surprised to see how it can actually transform your brain and the way you think. Let's start with some examples of how simply reframing a situation can help you to accomplish greater cognition. The example that comes to mind is the aforementioned hypothetical limit of working memory, which is set at 5 plus minus 2. Regardless of the new interpretation of working memory, this limit still exists, likely as we struggle to hold that information in the mind's eye and focus without losing track of it. So how do you get around this? One novel solution is something called chunking. It sounds gross, but it's not like that. Basically, chunking means that you combine multiple numbers into a single number, or a single semantic chunk. So for instance, 2 and 3 actually becomes 23. This way, you are actually remembering fewer numbers. Another interesting example of changing the way you approach a subject is to overcome the cognitive bias, known as functional fixedness. Functional fixedness describes an inability that many of us have to instantly see all the applications for any resource. We may see a tool as being an item used for a specific job, rather than something that can be used in a variety of ways. So for example, if you are given a hammer, you might think of that hammer as something to drive nails into the wall. Thus, you might not think to reach for it when trying to pry open a window. Because it is labeled as a hammer, it is harder to think of it outside of that context as a wrench. The result is that you become less resourceful. Again, the solution is to reframe the situation and change the way you ask your brain to operate. Instead of thinking of tools and resources as tools, try to ask yourself what raw materials you have available to you. So rather than a hammer, you have a hammer and a piece of wood, some metal, and a stick. Suddenly, the options increase. Taking it further. But changing the way you approach a problem or think about a situation can actually have a much more profound and fundamental impact on the way you think too. In particular, it has the ability to change the way that you perceive the world around you and the way that you control your mental state. Remember how we mentioned that when you visualize something, you light up areas in your brain as though you were actually doing that thing? So when you visualize yourself running, you actually light up areas in your brain corresponding to that movement and to the things you might see and hear on that run. Well, as it happens, this is realistic enough to effectively fool the brain. In other words, your brain thinks that you actually are running and that you actually are moving. No, this won't actually help you to lose weight, seeing as you aren't placing the same energy demands on your body. But in terms of changing your mood and even creating brain plasticity, strengthening the connections necessary to use correct running form, it really is as good as the real deal. This is why a dancer can actually practice their moves in their mind's eye, and it will be just as effective as if they were doing it in real life. To an extent, when they picture themselves moving, the same neurons fire as though they were really moving. The neurons that fire together still wire together, and as such, you reinforce the movements and can more easily reproduce the routine. Of course, you won't be able to develop your balance or grace in the same way, because you are only using a simulation of real-world physics rather than actually making those movements. But you get the point. Anything you want to rehearse, anything you want to get better at, you can do in this way. So, for instance, if you want to improve your memory retrieval and your ability to navigate a space, then you could try simply picturing yourself leaving your door and walking down the road. Visualize the turns you'd make to get to a specific destination and see if you can remember the way or if you can accurately picture the movements. Or try closing your eyes right now and then recreating the room you're in your mind's eye, including the position of items on the surfaces. Just how good is your awareness of your surroundings and your ability to commit that to memory? This kind of visualization training can be useful for improving your working memory too, because you're using your working memory to do it. Controlling mental state. What's truly fascinating is that you can use this in order to control your mental state. Many of us feel scared in situations that aren't all that stressful because we're visualizing what would happen if the worst case scenario were to happen. You were stressed when you were in debt because you were picturing how it might end in you getting into worse financial trouble. You were picturing your partner leaving you because you were so reckless with money. You were picturing your bank account at zero. But focus on calmer and on less stressful aspects of the situation. Focus on the plan, and you can place yourself back into a calm state. Likewise, when you are trying to focus yourself on whatever you're doing, and when you're trying to fixate on the task at hand, you need to make sure that you remind yourself in your mind's eye why it's important. Struggling to complete that essay? Picture yourself relaxing and feeling calm because you're finished. And picture what happens if you don't finish on time. More importantly, focus on the things about that essay that are inherently valuable.